I'll just get us started.
Okay.
The Jews!
Ow! That hurt my chest.
The Jews.
I gotta go. This is not my scene, man.
This episode isn't for the faint of heart or people who have hearts. So the Jews first came to Los Angeles in 1841. Get used to that word. We're here.
We're Jews.
We're Jews.
Where can I sit?
What's the big deal? So the Jews first came to Los Angeles in 1841 in the form of Jacob Frankfurt. Jacob Frankfurt.
Oh, that's a dude. It's not a town.
No, they didn't all. We didn't all come from one. We didn't spew out of the earth. The earth. Jacob Frankfurt. He came to LA via Santa Fe, New Mexico, via Germany. He lived in the Alexander Bell House, not the Bell House from the Bell episode, and not a Bell House from a Quasimodo story. And he worked as a tailor in the Bell's Row building on the southeast corner of Aliso and Los Angeles in the plaza. For a few short years, he enjoyed what must have been brutal, relentless discrimination, being the only Jewish person in all of Los Angeles. But by 1850, the gold rush was in full bloom, and with that brought a few more Jews to the California. What's going on here? I wrote this when I had 100-degree fever.
Yeah, this is clearly NyQuil language.
More Jews were coming to California during the gold rush, mostly not coming on the off chance of finding gold, but rather for the sure thing of opening up stores to sell things that the gold miners needed, like smart. Levi Strauss.
Wait, really?
Yeah, we sold Levi Strauss. Yeah, he came during the gold rush selling like denim and stuff like that.
Oh, cool.
To people mining for denim. They were looking for it. He had it all. The great denim mines of...
I need something that hugs my bottoms.
This flippy flap on my prospector outfit is just not doing it. I need something I can really soil into.
Something that the poop's going to really get ingrained into.
Yeah, something that no matter how many times you wash it, it's just part of the pants now.
I mean, when it gets wet, it's like wearing a shelf or something. It's the heaviest thing. It's just so heavy.
It's like that chocolate syrup that hardens when you pour it onto ice cream. This is disgusting. So by 1850, the population of Los Angeles was 8,624, and there were now a whopping 8 Jewish people in Los Angeles. They were Grandpappy Jacob Frankfurt, Abraham Jacoby, Philip Seikel, Morris Michaels, Morris L. Goodman, who was one of the 7 on the first Common Council of Los Angeles in 1850, and he helped found the first local chapters of the Freemasons and the International Order of Oddfellows.
And all the conspiracies come from that.
Yeah.
Okay. I have a feeling I'm going to hear about more of that. Not really.
Sort of, a little bit.
Side podcast stuff.
Yes, that'll be our White Power podcast.
White podcast, we call it.
White podcast. After that was Augustine Wasserman, and then Felix Bachmann and Joseph Plummer. 6 of these guys were German, 2 of them were Polish. Aside from the tailor Frankfurt, they were all merchants, and all of them lived and worked in the Bell's Row building, so they were all there. Then in the next few years, some more started trickling in. In 1853, Samuel and Joseph Labat came to LA from the original LA, Louisiana, New Orleans. No, Louisiana. NyQuil brain. I ate gumbo at Disneyland, so I should know this.
A little cultured.
They came from Louisiana, making them the first native-born Jewish Americans to live in Los Angeles.
Okay.
Then came Joseph Newmark, who in 1854 was the sort of de facto rabbi in town. He was conducting religious services in whatever rooms he could rent, which seems to be the trend for any organization in the old days of Los Angeles.
Hamburger Plaza.
Wait till you hear.
Oh, boy.
Then in July 1854, the Hebrew Benevolent Society was formed to unite the Jewish community in town. It was formed by
all 8 of them?
Yeah. All 8 of them who lived together?
Let's just not do it here.
There was like 12 at this point. It was formed by the New Orleans boy, Samuel Labat, and then Solomon Nunez Carvalho, who came here in 1853 as the official artist and photographer on John C. Fremont's last expedition to California. You'll remember him from the Los Angeles Year 1 episode. I think we talk about it a little bit. There's a plaque to him at the Campo de Cahuenga, so I assume we talked about him.
I'm sure we raised him at least.
So this Hebrew Benevolent Society, this was the first charitable organization in Los Angeles. And in 1855, they bought 3 acres of land at Lookout Drive and Lilac Terrace in Chavez Ravine for $1 and built the Hebrew Benevolent Society Cemetery, which was the first Jewish cemetery in the city. And now they play ball all over it.
When I did the research for Chavez Ravine, I remember them talking about a cemetery.
And you didn't seem to care about it then, but...
We made a joke about it.
It's nice of you to woke.
It's nice of you to woke.
So now with a good place to die set up, the Jewish community could start to grow. In 1861, Joseph Newmark started the first Jewish congregation in LA, Beth El, That's what it is. Bethel, which was quickly replaced in 1862 with B'nai B'rith in the city's first temple, of course, at Temple on Broadway, or on Fort between 2nd and 3rd. I saw both. I don't know which one it was, but it was the same place pretty much in those days. Take that, past. Eventually, in 1873, they moved to its current location, 3663 Wilshire Boulevard, where it is now known as Wilshire Boulevard Temple, and it's the oldest one in the city.
Okay.
The regular rabbi there was Abraham Wolf Edelman, who became the first full-time rabbi in the city in 1862. He spoke Spanish, so the Mexicans all called him Padre.
That's pretty cool.
By 1870, there were only 330 Jewish people in the city, but they were making their impact felt. In 1860, 2 of the 5 members of the LA Board of Supervisors were Jewish, Goodman from before and Julius Morris. In 1870, Emil Harris was one of 6 Los Angeles police officers. You might remember him. He was one of the ones who tried to protect the Chinese during the Chinatown Massacre in 1871. He also led the posse that captured Tiburcio Vasquez in 1874. Then in 1878, he became the first Jewish chief of police in Los Angeles, and maybe the last. John Jones became the first LA City Council president in 1871. Joseph Newmark's son, Harris Newmark, was a good friend of Charles Lummis and helped found the Los Angeles Public Library, in addition to owning the Temple Block where one of the original courthouses were from our last episode. He also owned Santa Anita Ranch and sold it to one of several Lucky Baldwins a little after 1872. He also owned Repetto Ranch, which is where Tiburcio Vasquez hid out for a while, and he was also instrumental in persuading Pacific Railroad to come to Los Angeles.
Listen to all those episodes.
I know.
And then get back to me.
There's more. Al Levy, creator of the oyster cocktail, was Jewish. Isaac Lankershim was Jewish.
Wow.
The hamburger department store was owned by the very Jewish Osher Hamburger. No cheese.
No cheese.
Not kosher.
Can't eat it.
Can't do it. Sorry. You're bathing the babe in the milk of its mother. Can't do it. But sure, buy some pants. Max Myberg, owner of the Crystal Palace and creator of the Fiesta de Los Angeles, was Jewish, and he was married to the daughter of another Jewish man, Isaiah Hellman, who owned the Farmers and Merchants Bank, which was a descendant of the bank that Tiburcio Vasquez had robbed. Hellman also helped found USC and lent the money to Harrison Gray Otis that he used to buy the LA Times that eventually got bombed. He also loaned a lot of money to Edward Doheny to drill for oil to make his fortune.
So everything that Los Angeles was known for before 1950, he had his hands in.
Pretty much.
Basically.
The fingerprints of...
He also made a bunch of movies.
He was also Cecil B. DeMille, and he killed Bela Lugosi. He's heroin. There was also Louis Lewin and Charles Jacoby, who formed the Pioneer Lot Association, which would go on to help create a little area known as Boyle Heights. Stepping back from that, though, in 1881, Tsar Alexander II was assassinated in Russia, so the Russians blamed the Jews and started genociding them, so a bunch of them fled the country. So a huge wave of them came to America, and many of those came out to Los Angeles. So in 1900, the population of LA was 102,000, and 2,500 of those were Jewish, most of them living downtown centered around Temple Street, where the temple was. Where the temple at? Temple Street. The age-old question.
It's a very easy question to answer.
But the city was starting to expand, and space was opening up elsewhere than cramped, smelly downtown. Across the...
It's not cramped.
Across the also smelly river from downtown was an area where over 13,000 years ago, pre-Shumash people had lived until around 3,500 years ago when the Keech arrived, eventually being pushed out and otherwise annihilated by the Spanish until they got kicked out by the Mexicans until 1850 when they were taken over by the Americans. Since 1781, this area was known as Paredon Blanco, meaning white bluffs. Those things I tell to get out of trouble all the time. This area of land stretched from the San Gabriel Mission on the north, El Camino Real on the south, the LA River on the west, and the Rio Hondo on the east, and was owned by our old friends, the Lugo family, the powerful family that William Wolfskill married into. Fingerprints everywhere.
Everywhere.
The Jew.
Conspiracy continues. White podcast.
White podcast. Oh, God, my voice. Is anyone finding this sexy?
Yeah, no, I'm turning on right now. Oh, yeah, that was it. That's the button there. I pooped a little.
My Levi's are stained. I'm magic shelling.
I do believe I just bought these denim, if you know what I mean.
The tag has been removed.
I cannot return these anymore.
But in the 1850s, an Irish immigrant named Andrew Boyle bought 22 acres of that land, who sold it out to some settlers, but nothing much was done with it until he died in 1871, and it was inherited by his son-in-law, William H. Workman, of the bank that Vasquez robbed.
That's right.
He was also part owner of Turnbull Canyon and a million other things we've mentioned him being a part of in this podcast that I'm too sick to have listed. He started to divide up the land for development to accommodate the growth spurt that the city was going through. These areas became known as East Los Angeles, which was modeled after a grand European city and in memory of his father-in-law, Boyle Heights. Don't confuse that with the current East LA, because East Los Angeles got rebranded in March 1917 and renamed after their local school, Abraham Lincoln High School, and became Lincoln Heights.
Right. I usually talk to people, hangers-on of LA, about like, oh, we're going to do this. Do you have anything to say? And everyone's like, Boyle Heights is in East LA. I'm like, okay.
Yeah, I know. That's what I kept, like, I was looking like, Jews in East Los Angeles. You mean Boyle Heights. It's not all East Los Angeles. It's the East Side.
Yeah, it's the East Side. It's east of Los Angeles. It's not East LA. I'm like, oh, okay.
And apparently there's like people in like Silver Lake and stuff are like, we're in East LA, man.
Oh, God.
No, you're not. But I'm in Sherman Oaks. I do live in East LA. It's a satellite pocket of East LA.
You're living in the embassy?
I'm protected under East LA law in my apartment.
Diplomatic immunity.
So the area that is now East LA used to be called Belvedere Gardens in 1921, but changed to East LA in the 30s. So East LA is, like we were saying, it's a place. East Side is that general area that covers 20.66 square miles over Boyle Heights, Lincoln Heights, El Sereno, and East LA. And don't you forget it.
Yeah.
Because someone's going to yell at me again. The Brooklyn Land and Building Company also developed some of the surrounding area, calling it Brooklyn Heights to try to attract East Coasters to move there. But confusing East Coast rubes blinded by the sunshine and glare from the oranges when they arrived, that wasn't the only tactic to get people to move east of the river. They also had attractions to try to draw people in, which is always the way to go.
Balloons.
Put an ostrich farm. So they had things like the Luna Park Zoo and East Lake Park, which is now Lincoln Park, and was the East Side sister to Westlake Park, which is now MacArthur Park. So they're
I didn't know they were
twin
sister
parks.
Yeah, twin parks.
It's sistery.
We're talking about history here.
They also had the California Alligator Farm, where you could ride Billy the Alligator.
At Lincoln Park, right?
I don't know where it was exactly.
I remember hearing about an alligator park there.
Yeah, I could not imagine and also very well imagine that there was more than one alligator park there.
That's the weird thing is, like, you said it makes no sense. I'm like, oh yeah, there was also like a zoo at the beach on Venice Boardwalk. So yeah, you know anything's possible, really. Attacked by a bear at the beach.
Too bad that flying cop wasn't around. At this alligator farm, you could ride Billy the alligator, who was the alligator, like pretty much any movie.
City alligator?
He was mayor. Any movie between the teens and the 40s with an alligator in it, that was Billy the alligator. It's named Billy as an anagram of the first letters of the names of all the children he ate.
Beth.
Ilya. Larry.
Top half of Larry, bottom half of Larry,
and Yanni.
First of all, my first cat was named Billy because of Billy the Kid. You said Billy was in all the movies, and I got excited. I'm like, I can't think of one movie with an alligator in it. I just got excited at the idea that I can go to a movie and fight it and watch Billy.
I can't name a movie with an alligator in it, but I also feel like all movies had an alligator in the 30s at least.
Yeah. What do we got? Well, we got an alligator.
If they're on a boat, what's that over there? Billy.
Billy, get over here.
Yeah, we've got an alligator and we have a bear at Venice.
And a bunch of shoes from the dead kids.
And Larry's shoes.
Larry's shoes.
You killed me, Larry. You're killing Larry.
You've done killed me, comma Larry.
Quote Larry.
Quote Larry.
Quote the Larry.
Quote Larry.
So they sold cheap houses to settlers there, but they reserved the best houses in areas with views from the bluffs, which is why there's a bunch of Victorian mansions in the Mount Pleasant area. But all the alligators and misleading names couldn't change the fact that this area was cut off from the rest of the city and didn't have good water access. All the water that they had was going to Billy.
Keep Billy strong.
The motto of Boyle Heights. Make Billy strong again. So because of that, those restrictions, there is a definite cap on how developed it could get. Not until future mayor William Workman inherited the land, he did in 1871, did things start to move forward. He convinced the city council to start building bridges, literally, and also pipelines. Literally.
Also.
Then in 1889, the Los Angeles Cable Railroad opened up the Downey Avenue Viaduct that went over the LA River and the Southern Pacific Rail Yard and connected downtown to Lincoln Heights. So now the vein was open and people could come flowing into the east side along with their precious water.
Oh, God, some sort of life force. I don't know. Can we block the wind? How do we charge these people for that? Who's in charge of that? Workman? Wolfskill?
Billy?
Billy?
Is it the alligator? Who runs things? Who's in charge around here?
Who runs wind?
Billy runs the town.
You got to feed Billy if you want to talk to Billy.
If you want to get any laws passed in Congress, you got to bring a live turkey.
You got to make Billy's name longer. You know what I mean?
Add a T to that. I'm looking at you, Tina. Decades later, it became even easier to get there because during the City Beautiful movement between 1909 and 1933, 6 bridges were built connecting downtown to Boyle Heights alone, which is the area we're going to be focusing on now.
How did that happen?
I saw something scary. And for context, Boyle Heights nowadays is bordered by the 10 on the north, Olympic on the south, Indiana on the east, and Boyle on the west. So now that this area was easier to get into and out of, it became a habitable place. But what sort of people would live there? The Jews.
Back to the first sentence.
Let me start again. White podcast. I wonder why people don't like us.
What is it about us that people don't like?
So the west side of LA was the first urban area of the United States that was set aside to be exclusively residential.
Yeah, no, I was going to talk about that. Okay.
Oh, well, too late. Got to it first. My fact,
Eat
my
poo.
knowledge. Devour my denims. You can lick my Levi's.
Swallow my stains.
Munch on my magic shell, if you know what I mean. Since the west side was exclusively residential, all the factories in town had to be built on the east side. So that drew a lot of the people who worked in those factories to the east side to be closer to work. Those people, immigrants.
Yeah.
So in the late 1800s, coming into the east side were a lot of Italians, Germans, French, Russians, Americans, Armenians, Chinese, Japanese. There was a big Serbian community for a while, and then also African Americans were there. Then in the early 1900s, the Jews started coming in. I said it. I just wanted you to feel that. In the early 1900s, the Jews started coming in because, like the rest of these minority groups, they weren't allowed to live most other places in the city because of restrictive housing covenants. The 19-teens then brought a huge influx of Jewish residents who were fleeing World War I Europe and were drawn from the East Coast to the booming Los Angeles. So in 1920, there were 20,000 Jews in LA, and by 1930, the population of LA as a whole was 1.2 million, and 70,000 were Jewish, with some 35,000 of them living in Boyle Heights.
Wow.
So basically half of the population. Actually, that's exactly half of the population. They split up families so that it could be exactly half.
We need one more. Send one of your daughters. I don't care.
Give us Moses.
You split the Alley River.
That was just a drought.
Pretend to do it again. Just do it.
So let's talk about what this community in Boyle Heights was like.
Please.
The community was centered on what was known as Brooklyn Avenue. We'll get to what it's now called later. There was also a hub around Wabash Avenue and an enclave a little further north in City Terrace. By the 20s, most of the businesses in the area were Jewish run, and Yiddish was as common on the streets as Spanish is. Now, in the early 1900s, a wave of anti-Semitism started rising in LA, and this was one wave the LA Jews didn't want to be surfing on, and they started getting excluded from a lot.
They were wiping out.
Wiped out! So because of this, they were getting excluded from a lot of the organizations that they had helped found years earlier. So in response to that, they started making their own community centers. They had the Cleveland Free Loan Society and the Chicago Loan Society to give out loans to people who moved to LA from Cleveland and Chicago. The first Jewish community center in Los Angeles, the Modern Hebrew School and Social Center, opened there in 1924. In 1931, the huge Menorah Center at Wabash and Alma opened. In 1911, the Hebrew Sheltering Association opened at 4th and Boyle, turning into the Jewish Home for the Aged at 131 South Boyle Avenue in 1916, and still lives on today in Reseda, which freaked me out because the library I work at, a lot of people come in from the Jewish elderly home, and when I read that, I was like, wait a minute.
I know this. I'm reading about myself now.
Who's this little boy that just walked into the store? Why does he have a microphone? In 1902, the Caspar Cone Hospital opened up there, which eventually turned into Cedar Sinai. Not there, but that organization.
Oh, I see.
The establishment that became City of Hope also started in Jewish Boyle Heights. The original Cantor Bros Delicatessen opened in 1931 at 2323 Brooklyn Avenue. Wow. In 1904, the Talmud Torah School opened there as one of the early religious institutions in the area, but in 1912, it morphed into the big one. At 247 North Breed Street, the $75,000 Breed Street Shul, designed by Abram Edelman, opened up to house the Talmud Torah of Los Angeles congregation. It was built in the Byzantine Revival style and became the centerpiece of Jewish life in Boyle Heights. At its peak, it had 75,000 members, which was the biggest congregation west of Chicago. It was referred to as the Queen of the Shuls. They'd even spend $5,000 to bring in a nationally renowned cantor for the high holiday services. In May 1948, they also became the first place in LA to fly an Israeli flag. If you want to see it in all its glory, you can watch the Yom Kippur scene in The Jazz Singer that was filmed there.
Oh, wow.
But Greg, where did they go when they died?
Where did they go when they died?
One of two Jewish cemeteries in Boyle Heights. That's where they go when they die. The old cemetery in Chavez Ravine lasted until 1910 when the last of the corpses was moved to the Home of Peace Memorial Park at 4334 Whittier Boulevard, where they now ghost mingle with people like Albert Brooks's dad, Harry Einstein, Carl Laemmle, Louis B. Mayer, all three Warner brothers, and Curly and Shemp of Stooge fame.
Wow, really?
Yeah, they're all there.
That's a good roundup. That's a good cast of a cemetery.
And then there was the not as big of heavy hitter cemetery, Mount Zion at 1030 South Downey Road, which was pretty much connected to it. It's right next door. This place opened in 1916 to provide free burials for Jews who didn't have the money to be buried.
Oh, wow.
It wasn't a pretty place, but it got the job of being a hole for dead people done. They even had
dead people.
They had a funeral for a bootlegger who got murdered, so nobody was really turned away from there.
Yeah.
One story from 1932 was when a guy named Hyman Bobroff went outside the place and shot himself in the head, and then as he fell, his body flinched, and he also shot himself in the heart. Not historically important, but ridiculous.
Weird.
Amongst the living Jewish people living in Boyle Heights included Eric Garcetti's grandparents and great-grandparents, Max Factor, that's not who his great-grandparents are, that's a different person.
Yeah, not the same people.
Mickey Cohen, who is his great-grandparents.
Yeah.
Mickey Cohen would hang out in the Ebony Room bar, and Bugsy Siegel ran rackets out of the area.
Didn't he grow up there too? Mickey Cohen?
Yeah, Mickey Cohen. Yeah. Who?
I just said the names, but who is that?
What am I saying? Wait, where am I? I took NyQuil and now I'm here. Like I said, this was a mostly immigrant neighborhood, so the Jewish people here weren't the rich ones making movies in Hollywood.
Yeah.
They were working class, like me. They also weren't Orthodox, so they were less religious and much more liberal, as most fresh out of Europe Jewish people were. And with that liberalism came socialist and communist leanings, and with that came a lot of political engagement. Most of the big workers' unions, including the garment workers, which we also another episode, a lot of the big workers' unions, they had headquarters on Brooklyn Avenue because many of their members lived in that area. In 1909, the Workmen's Circle / Arbeiter Ring, which means workers' circle in German, opened, which was a Yiddish cultural center and political organization headquartered inside the Vladeck Center in Boyle Heights, which was where most of these unions were formed. In all, there were over 100 coordinating councils, 50 community centers and associations, and tons of social workers operating out of Boyle Heights. So it was like the political heart of Los Angeles. A ton of civil rights groups came out of this area at this time, and that's a legacy that's still going strong there. But what really was impressive in Boyle Heights in the first half of the 20th century wasn't just how much the Jewish community flourished, but how diverse the entire area was.
Yeah.
There were 40 different nationalities living there, which is why it became known as the Ellis Island of Los Angeles. It was incredibly diverse and pretty integrated also, and it would seem from, I didn't read anything bad except for the guy shooting himself twice. I didn't read any negative stories. Jews and Mexicans were going to the same schools, playing on the same sports teams. There was a lot of sharing of cultures also. Cantor's was just as popular with the Mexican residents as it was with the Jewish, which is why you still see so many places on the east side selling pastrami.
Yeah, it was a thing I never thought of before.
I always confused me. Like, how do they know what pastrami is?
The Hat, which is not in Boyle Heights, I know, but it's just on that side of town.
Yeah.
You got to go over that side of the
Yeah,
Hat.
it's in Pasadena.
It's also in Alhambra. Oh, duh.
I'm eating there right now. I know that.
I'm the Hat. I'm Carl Hat.
I talk like the Sorting Hat from Harry Potter. I'm the Hat. And the Jews and Latinos lived happily
ever after.
El Fino. The Jews and Latinos were both being discriminated against in the rest of the city, so they started teaming up to fight against that. I sound like I'm on the verge of tears, but I swear I'm just on the verge of dying.
It's different. No one will cry.
The whole world cries when I cry, though.
That's better than me just crying whenever Don Draper cries.
Who? You mean Dick Whitley or whatever his name?
Dick Whitley.
What is his name?
Dick Whitman. Dick Whit.
I prefer Dick Whitley. He should have stolen another guy's identity.
Dick Whitley here.
Peggy, I'm Dick Whitley. Peggy, don't tell anyone I'm Dick Whitley.
Don, what's your real name? Dick Whitley. Adman extraordinaire. Dick Whitley.
The Jews and the Latinos, they started teaming up to fight against the combined discrimination they were facing. And in 1949, the two groups put all their support behind getting Edward Roybal elected as the first Latino city council member.
Swear to God. If you step more on my toes... No, go ahead. That's fine. I'll talk about him again.
I thought we were talking about Jewish and Latino teamwork, and now you're telling me not to step on your toes? How else do you tango?
Proving again that Jewish people don't know how to dance. Go ahead.
Is that a stereotype?
I don't think it is. I just like making up my own stereotypes. Well, Chinese people swim too much.
Here's a stereotype for you. Greg talks too much. So they got Edward Roybal elected first Latino city council member. Even though one of the guys he was running against was Jewish, he still got the Jewish vote because the saying was what's good for Boyle Heights is good for the Jews. So, whatever it took to advance both of these communities was a good thing. By 1940, LA had the 7th largest Jewish population in the country, and the biggest group in Boyle Heights were Jews, which is why it started being referred to as Los Angeles' Lower East Side. East Side is right, but not East LA.
Different.
Lower East LA. But this diversity wasn't seen as a good thing by everybody.
Of course not. Why would it?
Could you believe racists didn't like it?
Could you believe that white people didn't like commingling of ethnic groups?
What are they eating? Pastrami there? Pastrami next to a taco shop? What's tacos? Also, what's pastrami? In 1939, the Federal Housing Authority gave Boyle Heights its lowest possible rating because it was said to be filled with subversive racial elements. This is a process known as redlining, which means that with such a low rating, banks would either not give you or charge you a fortune to get a loan to buy a house in that area. The diversity was seen as a sign of being a bad neighborhood. Around the same time, the African American population was growing, and the panicked white lawmakers focused their attention on how to segregate them, so they passed laws, not explicitly, but basically laws that redefined what white was to now include Jews and Italians and Irish and Slavs, which before this were seen as other, but now got lumped into the blanket term of regular old whites, Caucasian.
Yeah.
So on top of that, in 1948, the restrictive housing covenants were ruled unconstitutional by the Supreme Court.
Get 'em.
So now a bunch of more parts of the city became available to the newly whitened Jews. So between Jewish veterans coming home from World War II wanting to own a home in their old neighborhood of Boyle Heights, but not being able to get a loan because of the redlining and restrictions being lifted on where they could live, it was looking less attractive to live in the old buildings of crowded Boyle Heights, and the calls of the cheap housing in the brand new empty San Fernando Valley were sweeter than the shofar at the end of Yom Kippur. I'll explain that to you one day.
Yeah, please do.
You should come to the High Holy Holidays.
Is that not a meal? Everything I don't know in a different culture, I'm like, is that food?
Is that a feast day?
I'll go for that. What's the funeral where I eat a lot? I'm going to go to that.
Wolfgang Puck's funeral? I'll eat a lot at that one. I wait the day. I wait the day.
Is Emerald Lagasse dead? Is that what we're all eating?
Lagasse.
Oh,
Not the
Lagasse.
chef.
The vampire. Not the actor either. The vampire.
The real one that the actor is based on.
Max Shrek Lagasse.
Nosferosi. With a Jewish population in 1946 of 168,000 in Los Angeles, there was a lot of us to go around. North Hollywood and Panorama City took in a huge surge of new Jewish residents.
Beautiful areas.
At the time.
Sure.
Where else could they go?
You're yelling at me?
I'm very sick.
Are you defending Panorama City?
I don't know why. I feel an obligation to protect the valley anytime you come after it, even if it's something I hate, like Silmar. The valley even started getting developed by Jewish developers like S. Mark Taper, Louis H. Boyer, Lawrence Weinberg, Nathan Chappelle, no relation, and a guy named Eli Broad. By 1950, there were 22,000 Jewish families living in the valley. There were other Jewish architects working around the city like Richard Neutra, the guy who did the new Hall of Records building we talked about last time, Peter Laszlo, and Frank Gehry. A lot of Jewish people from Boyle Heights also moved to the west side of LA to the Pico Robertson area, which still has a strong Jewish community, and to Fairfax, which has less of a Jewish community today than it used to.
But Cantor's is there.
Shut up, you're stepping on my toes. Now who can't tango?
Tango, Greg. You're not tangoing.
The move to Fairfax, well, we're going to talk about it right now. The move to Fairfax had started earlier, and by the 40s, there were already 4 temples there, which is why in 1941, Cantor's in Boyle Heights opened up a second location there, which moved to where it is now in 1953 in that building. The Boyle Heights Cantor's closed in 1948, but this one is obviously still there. We're there right now.
We're going to go, exactly, we're going to go right now.
I need a taco, and that's where I go.
And that's where I go. I need celery soda and a taco.
With all the Jewish people in the valley and on the west side, they were still divided by the mountains, which this was interesting to me, which is why there's so many Jewish institutions connecting the two areas inside the Sepulveda Pass, like the Skirball Center, the American Jewish University, and Stephen S. Weiss.
Wow, I didn't know that.
I know. So every time you go through there, you're being converted. Jewish life spread out from Boyle Heights into the rest of LA, and it became a diaspora with a few mostly disconnected pockets around the city. And in 1951, the Jewish population was at 330,000. But with all that physical divide also came an ideological divide. Most of the new Jewish residents in the 50s had come to the city post-World War post-World War II. Mm-hmm. Which one's which? Which one came first?
Which one did Hitler have the mustache for? He didn't have it for both.
One of them, he just got shot. Which one was that? When did Hitler get shot but didn't die? So since they were relatively new to the city, they had no connection to Boyle Heights, and they moved straight into the west side or to the valley. And then the ones who had lived in Boyle Heights before the war but moved away, they kind of turned their backs on their working class, poorer roots on the east side.
That's what moving up feels like.
Moving on up, and I'm not looking back. Then the Jews who stayed in Boyle Heights started to resent the ones in the valley and the west side because of that, and because they were better off than them. Then the blacklist communist scare happened, and the west side and valley Jews rejected the radicalism and communist leanings of the community in Boyle Heights because they didn't want to get involved with any of that. So it split them into sort of the radicals on the east and the conservatives on the west. But as for Jewish life in Boyle Heights itself, by the late 50s, it was pretty much done. By 1960, only 4% of LA's Jewish population lived in Boyle Heights, and in 1994, there were only 8 Jewish people there.
The original 8.
The original, they're still there.
Alive.
They would not give up. Alive and stronger than ever. Still catching bandits. The transition here in 1994 was solidified by the renaming that year of Brooklyn Avenue to Cesar Chavez Avenue.
And no one could stop them.
Except Tiburcio Vasquez, robber of street names. The last Jewish person to be born and raised in Boyle Heights was Eddie Goldstein, who married into a Mexican family and apparently spoke with a strong Mexican-American accent.
Pretty cool.
He died in 2013 at age 79. There's still some lettering and Jewish imagery on a lot of the storefronts there. Home of Peace Cemetery still gets about 100 burials a year, but the Mount Zion Cemetery is in serious state of neglect. It's looked after by Home of Peace and the Jewish Federation, but it's not technically owned by anybody, so it hasn't had a burial in years, and most of its tombstones have been knocked over and looted. In 2013, they got a $250,000 donation from a local entrepreneur named Shlomo Recknitz.
That's not real.
And that it's an anagram for boys that Billy threw up.
Survivors of Billy.
And then the rest of the community pitched in after that and gave an extra $50,000, so we'll see what that gets turned into. Okay. Lots of the old temples are now churches, so you'll see Jewish stars on them and stuff.
I was driving through the other day. I'm like, that's weird. This is also weird. That's weird.
But the Breed Street Shul, the centerpiece of Jewish Boyle Heights, it still stands, sort of. It got kind of abandoned after most of the community left, and in the 70s it became a hangout for gangs. In the 80s it got all tagged up inside, and it's really falling apart. Then it got damaged in the 1987 Whittier Narrows earthquake, and in 1992 it closed down officially. It was being looked after by the Jewish Historical Society of Southern California, who petitioned for it to get historical protection. In 1998, it was visited by current President, First Lady Hillary Clinton as part of that, and then in 1999, they started the Breed Street Shul project to raise money to start the restoration process that in the year 2000 led to a Jewish and Latino alliance that raised money to turn it into the Boyle Heights Cultural Museum and Community Center.
I'd high five you, but you're sick and I don't want to go near you, but we would high five right now over
that's
that.
Another stereotype. In 2001, it was successfully put on the National Register of Historic Places, and in 2011, the smaller part of it from 1915 reopened as that community center. It's the last remaining of the 30 synagogues throughout Boyle Heights and City Terrace, so the Jewish days in Boyle Heights are over for now, but anti-Semites fear not, because LA still has the 4th biggest Jewish community in the world, behind Tel Aviv, New York, and Jerusalem. New York City, that is. Probably all of New York. We're about 6% of the city's population, so there's still plenty of us for you to hate.
That's enough.
Anything over 5.